Why should I kill my girlfriend?
This is Simone Strobel, with her friend and boyfriend outside a bar in Australia. A few hours later, she vanished. Then, her naked body was discovered near a caravan park. When her boyfriend, Tobias Suckfuell, was questioned, he seemed outraged at the accusation. And yet, he has repeatedly avoided justice and done all in his power to stay out of the courthouse.
You've been named as a person of interest in Australia. Why won't you give evidence? Why won't you appear at the inquest into the murder of your girlfriend?
In July 2023, all charges against Tobias were dropped, to the shock of Simone's family. It'd been nearly 2 decades since her gruesome murder, and the answers seem further away than ever. Let's explore the full story of Simone Strobel and see if we can piece together the puzzle ourselves. It was August 2004, and these two embarked on a backpacking trip to Australia. Simone Strobel and Tobias Suckfuell boarded a plane from Germany, and 30 hours later, they were in Sydney. But they wouldn't stop there. They wanted to tour the entire continent. It was their first big trip away from home, and in many ways, it felt like their honeymoon. So they rented a van and went around the country. They would only stop for longer periods to work on farms and plantations. Whenever she could, Simone would send some photos to her family back in Germany. Around New Year's 2005, the pair made it to Brisbane, and when Simi phoned her family to wish them a happy new year, she sounded over the moon. It was such a different life from what she had before. A few months ago, she was a kindergarten teacher, living half at home, half at school, and getting away for the weekend whenever she could. Now she was working on farms, making new friends every day, and seeing a kind of natural beauty she'd never seen before. After all, Australia has a pretty different climate compared to Germany, and Simi's family did not worry about their daughter's safety. She was in an overall safe country with her boyfriend of 6 years, Tobias's sister, Katrin, and their mutual friend, a man named Jens. After the 4 of them reunited in Brisbane, they proceeded to drive from Queensland down to South Lismore Central Park in New South Wales. On February 11th, 2005, Simone and Tobias camped at a caravan park, with the intention to stay there for a few days. Katrin and Jens would sleep in a tent nearby. On the evening of February 14th, the 4 of them went to a nearby pub named Golan Hotel. It was a walking range from the camping park, perfect if you've had a few. But these 4 friends didn't just have a few. According to the bartenders who were at the pub that night, they were beyond drunk. And towards midnight, they started drunk fighting inside the bar. Voices were raised, threats were made, and the bartenders decided it was time for this group to leave. Here they are, outside the pub, continuing their fight. Among barely standing up and cussing at each other, Tobias can also be seen insulting the security guard for not letting him finish his beer, as if he needed another one. And here's the creepiest part. Before the fight was over, it escalated between Tobias and Simi. Sadly, this was the last footage of Simone Strobel. 2 hours after the street surveillance camera recorded her argument, she vanished. People at the caravan park heard the fight too. When they looked, they saw 4 drunk friends raising their voices at each other and making wild gestures in the air. Then, there were 3 friends, someone who saw Simone walk away from the park. However, she left her phone and shoes behind. 7 hours later, Simone's friends were going around the caravan park asking if anyone had seen her. They were worried something horrible had happened to her. At least, that's what they told the campers and the authorities when they gave them a ring that morning. But the first responders at the scene remembered Katrin and Jens frantically searching for Simone while Tobias chilled in his van. This was just the tip of the iceberg. Simone's naked and lifeless body would be found hidden under palm fronds just a few feet away from the caravan park, and Tobias would become the main suspect in her murder. Simone Strobel was born on September 20th, 1979, in Rieden, Germany. She grew up with her parents, Gabby and Gustav, and her brother Alexander in a gorgeous little town known for its peace, impeccable neighborhoods, and safety. Simi, as her family called her, never worried about her safety. She didn't have to. This was not the kind of place where bad things happened to people who minded their own business. And as she grew into a smart, independent adult, she realized she had 2 big passions: the outdoors and helping others. So, on the one hand, she always stayed active, running, swimming, hiking, and the like. On the other hand, she became a kindergarten teacher. She wanted to be the best guide there was for her tiny students. Everyone around Simi thought she was meant for her job. She exuded warm energy and those positive vibes that kids needed. If you were around Simi for a few hours, it was impossible not to smile and feel at ease. Simi was also stable when it came to relationships. She'd only had one, with Tobias Suckfuell. They met when she was 19 and he was 18. The two hit it off immediately, and both of their families had adopted the other's child, so to speak. Their big trip to Australia would be the first time they would be away from their families for so long. Gabby and Gustav encouraged her to go. This would be a trip she'd remember forever, and it would solidify her already great relationship with Tobias, they thought. They would live to regret this forever. They did not know Tobias. Not really. Tobias was the one to make the fateful call to Simone's family in February 2005. Their daughter was missing, he said, and he was doing everything in his power to find her. Gabby and Gustav were devastated. How do you even take this news from so far away, knowing there is little you can do about it? Gabby sat down, took a deep breath, and tried to compose herself. She had one question for Tobias. Had there been any arguments that night? Tobias said no. Imagine how Simone's family felt when they learned her group had been fighting the entire time before her disappearance. Why did Tobias hide this from them? Did he not realize they would speak to the authorities too? Simi's brother Alexander immediately flew to Australia to help with the investigation. The first thing he told his parents was he was outraged at how chill the detectives seemed to be. They were dismissive of Simone's disappearance. Why? Well, campers at that caravan park had a tendency to gather up to smoke pot and worse. So wandering off into the woods while intoxicated was not that uncommon. Sure, but what about the fact that her life could be in danger? The detective said these campgoers normally return on their own a few days later, if a bit more ragged. Alexander could not believe what he was hearing. He knew his sister was in danger, and every second was of huge importance. 72 hours later, though, New South Wales authorities agreed to begin the missing person investigation. By the end of February 17th, the detectives found Simone's lifeless body covered with palm leaves in the wooded area around the caravan park. It was so heavily decomposed that it could not be identified immediately. It was sent to the lab. Its DNA probed via dental records and compared to the DNA on Simone's campsite toothbrush. There was a match.
Identified a body found on the state's north coast last week as that of missing German backpacker Simone Strobel. The German tourist was last seen outside Byron Bay's Great Northern Hotel 10 days ago. Her body was found last Thursday in the nearby city of Lismore, close to a caravan park where she'd been staying.
To add insult to injury, her clothes had been removed, and she hadn't even been buried. It was almost as if her killer was sure he was not going to get caught. Simone's cause of death was listed as homicide by asphyxiation. There were no signs of a struggle or SA.
Look, a very sad case. I think she and her boyfriend Toby and two friends, including his sister Katrin, were travelling the East Coast. She was murdered, and her body was found about a week later in not even a shallow grave really. Her body was just there, covered with leaves and palm fronds.
The general atmosphere in that part of Australia was fear.
Was there a crazy travelling around looking to do harm?
Backpackers are a bit more vulnerable. They don't have a roof over their heads, and they don't know the people they meet on their trip. Now, they feared for their lives. What if there was a serial killer targeting young travelers? If Simone fell victim, anyone else could be next. Vigils were held for Simone both in Lismore and Wurzburg, near her hometown. Communities were concerned, and Simone's family was in shambles. They could not get over her gruesome death. And as more time passed, the more desperate they were for answers. The question just refused to go away. They needed to know who had done this to their girl. Simone's body was discovered in February 2005. By the end of the year, there were still no answers. So Simone's family hired a team of private investigators, and they flew from Germany to Australia. The more questions they asked, the more the same name popped up: Tobias Suckfuell. He had a photo of Simone and himself, on which he had written, "In my heart, in my mind, we will always be together, in love forever, Tobias. But everything else about him painted the opposite kind of picture. Well, him and his sister.
I've been lying from the beginning to the Australian authorities and the German authorities about important facts.
In each interrogation, Tobias lied through his teeth, telling conflicting stories and denying even the most well-known facts.
An argument between yourself and Simone?
No, I had nothing. Why you ask me these questions on 5 times?
Did you kill Simone Strobel?
No, never. Why should I kill my girlfriend?
But after a few months of interrogations, he stopped talking to authorities altogether. He refused to come to the station and kept a low profile. The German PIs agreed with the local authorities. This only made him look more suspicious. But they couldn't check just how suspicious he was anymore because he flew to South Africa, took a different name, and began working as a surfing instructor. Katrin and Jens flew back home to Germany, and while Tobias flew to Africa. Jens had met the pair after New Year's in 2005 in Brisbane. For the first 3 weeks, he said all was fine and dandy, at least as far as he could see. But after the first week of February, there were constant arguments between the pair. And between the arguments, there was total silence. Jens was sure they were on the brink of breaking up. There was nothing but toxicity left between these two, and Jens seemed to side with Simone. He said that while Simi appeared to try and fix things, Tobias was angry, resentful, and childish. He was not a peacemaker. He kept adding fuel to the fire with every opportunity. And on the day that Simi vanished, Tobias drank far over his usual quantity. Jens was concerned. After Simone's body was found, he grew even more concerned. Perhaps Tobias knew what he was about to do. After all, they call alcohol liquid courage. Well, more often than not, it should be called liquid recklessness. But even recklessness shouldn't be what Tobias did. That is just evil. The final thing Jens said was that on the morning of February 15th, Tobias instructed him and Katrin to lie to the authorities. Lie about the pot they'd been smoking, about their over drinking, and about the arguments.
Toby had worded him up on what he should say, not for the inquest, but generally to police.
He said that it would just make them look more suspicious. To Jens, this only made him more suspicious. When authorities asked him if he thought Tobias was capable of taking Simi's life, Jens said, "I don't know." The authorities recovered Simone's diary from the caravan park. Her last entry described how much she was annoyed by Tobias. She said that they were not on speaking terms and their relationship would probably end with their Australian adventure. Sadly though, this was, like Jen's account, only circumstantial evidence. Both Tobias and his sister Katrin were called in to an inquest, but neither of them returned to Australia. So why was his sister a suspect too? For starters, because of the lack of struggle marks on Simi's body, the coroner concluded there were 2 people involved in unaliving her.
Because they refused to come to the inquest, they refused to turn up despite requests from police.
In 2006, a New South Wales detective flew to South Africa in an attempt to track Tobias down. Knowing he was a passionate surfer, he'd scoured the coastal towns until he found a poster in Wilderness, the surfing lessons offered by Tobias.
Went to the surf lessons were being run out of a backpacker's lodge. Now, I couldn't go in there as an Australian. I thought that's just going to be a little bit too obvious and as a non-English speaker backpacker. So I went in there and just didn't speak to anybody the whole time I was there.
Tobias lived a good life, free riding at that lodge. The detective enlisted a local actress to get close to him and obtain a confession.
Sort of memorial deep in the national forest to Simone, and they had seen it, and he would often go there and pray and sing, take beers and drink around this memorial.
But Simi had memorials in Lismore and Wurzburg. Why not go there? Tobias was also wearing Simone's necklace, and his backstory, he'd completely changed it. No one in Wilderness knew who he was.
He was telling people he was a soccer star from Germany. He was part of the national football team. He was quite famous, so he'd like to live anonymously and move about anonymously.
When the detective finally confronted him, revealing his actual name in front of his surf students, Tobias ran to his car. He immediately fled Wilderness and moved to another lodge on the coast. Shockingly, Tobias would eventually settle in Australia, marrying a woman and taking her last name, Moran. And yet, he would not spend one day in prison. In 2020, the Australian authorities announced a $1 million reward for information leading to Simone's killer. It had been 15 harrowing years, and her family was still fighting to get justice. The authorities thought this would encourage the public to come forward with new clues. At this point, Tobias Moran was married with 2 children. His wife was pregnant with their 3rd child when he was arrested on July 26, 2022.
Police have issued arrest warrants for 2 German women following the murder of a 25-year-old backpacker on the state's north coast 17 years ago. The victim's former Australian boyfriend has now been charged with her murder.
Tobias Moran is tonight behind bars in Sydney, leaving behind his new life and new family. His alleged dark past catching up with him.
Tobias, what have you been doing for the last 20 years?
Back in 2005, DNA tests were not technologically brilliant, but a strand of blonde hair found at the crime scene had been kept in a Lismore lab all this time. When it was tested in 2022, it turned up Tobias's DNA. The prosecution's theory states that Tobias strangled Simi in the van after their last argument. Then he enlisted his sister to drag her into the woods and bury her. Sadly, once again, the defense argued there was only circumstantial evidence, so Tobias was granted bail, and in the summer of 2023, the charges were withdrawn. You can only imagine Gabby and Gustav's despair upon hearing this for a few months, and they thought they were closer than ever to getting justice for their daughter. Now, it seems like that was their last chance. It seems unlikely that the investigation will continue, or that Tobias or Katrin will ever face repercussions for their vile action. But with a huge update happening after as much as 17 years, who knows? Maybe there will be closure for Simi's family after all. In the meantime, let's just hope that no more people will suffer at the hands of these shady people. Hey, thanks for watching. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know similar stories? Let me know in a comment, and before you leave, you know the drill. Like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you soon.